Well, hi again, this is Dr. Michael Bogart, and once again, welcome back to our video series, Exploring World Religions. In this 15th series of videos, we'll be looking at Protestantism. However, unlike many of the other religious groups we've been studying, Protestantism isn't a single entity. It's more of a loose collection of groups that have some basic things in common. The most basic thing, the one that started the whole movement, was that many people back in the late Middle Ages felt that there was something very wrong with the Roman Catholic Church. In this series of video clips, we will see some of the other commonalities of Protestantism as well as some of the differences in these groups. So let me begin with the same running start we used in the series with Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. That's series 14. The common Christian origins with Jesus and the early Christian church are what I'm going to focus on in this first little bit here. I explained this background more fully in series 13, in which I laid out a basic understanding of Christianity as it began and developed until around the year 400 AD. Christianity began with the life and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth, and it had grown from a tiny movement among Jews who believed that Jesus was their Messiah to a separate religious group that included Jews and Gentiles. Christianity began among Middle Eastern Jews and within 400 years encompassed most of the Roman Empire and many lands beyond. But after 400 AD, the Roman system began to fall apart. With the disintegration of the Roman structure in its western provinces, these regions experienced a leadership vacuum. While Germanic barbarian kingdoms replaced the Roman system, there was one major survival from the old Roman order to fill that vacuum, and that was the Christian church. Because the church had its own resources, its own highly organized and disciplined leadership structure, it was therefore far less intimidated by the barbarians, and it quickly became a major power broker. So as I mentioned in series 14, for practical purposes, there was a single Christian church for around 1,000 years after Jesus and the apostles. But over the centuries, tensions and disagreements stretched this unity to the breaking point. In 1054, Pope Leo IX in Rome and Patriarch Cerularius of Constantinople made these disagreements permanent by excommunicating one another over a number of issues. The eastern and western portions of the church went their separate ways, and Roman Catholicism rose to great heights of power in the Middle Ages. But along with the prestige, wealth, and power, it also began to experience significant challenges. The disastrous Crusades, for instance, rival popes, clergy corruption, and an increasingly educated laity. By the way, laity means rank-and-file church members. So as the Middle Ages came to a close, the Roman Catholic Church struggled to hold itself together, ultimately without success. The first group to split from Catholicism and survive was the Unitas Fratrum, or United Brothers, later known as the Moravian Brethren. The Unitas Fratrum formed in the second decade of the 1400s and were led by a Czech priest named Jan Hus, who instituted several reforms in Prague. For instance, he instituted Mass in the language of the people, which would be Czech or Bohemian in this case. He instituted married clergy, full participation of the laity in Holy Communion, and the repudiation of the dogma of purgatory and the practice of selling indulgences. We'll look at indulgences a bit more in clip 2. Hus was summoned to the Council of Constance for questioning, and there he was condemned as a heretic and executed in 1415. The followers of Hus eventually went underground and reemerged publicly several centuries later as the Moravian Brethren. Now, most experts classify the Unitas Fratrum as a proto-Protestant group because their leader did not survive and the movement was suppressed, at least publicly. But the situation had changed drastically by the early 1500s. In 1415, the Roman Catholic Church was still able to quash all splinter groups. But by 1515, that control was gone. Why? Well, first was the rise of nationalism. Jan Hus was a champion of the Czech people and the language of the Czechs and the culture. But he was not alone. King Philip IV, called Philippe le Bel, or Philip the Fair of France, was an advocate of French nationalism and pride. His nationalism took the form in 1302 of standing up to Pope Boniface over king's right to tax church property. England had always seen itself as somewhat apart from the rest of Europe. But during this time, there was a growing and intense sense of English nationalism. The Germans, though separated into numerous kingdoms and duchies, were collectively growing resentful at what they considered abuse and disrespect by the Italian church hierarchy. Spain was an emerging world power due to its defeat of the last Muslim stronghold in its territory and its colonization of the Americas. Portugal was experiencing much the same thing on a smaller scale. So instead of a person seeing himself or herself as a Catholic first and, say, French second, the reverse was becoming more the norm. French first, then Catholic. Then there was the problem of corruption in the church. In the Middle Ages, it was not uncommon for popes, bishops, and even priests to have mistresses and illegitimate children. For example, Pope Alexander VI was known to have several illegitimate children, and he was able to set them up with cushy positions of power and influence. Another example would be the practice of wealthy families buying bishoprics for their sons. This left rank-and-file Catholics to wonder whether their bishop had any real spiritual commitment or insight at all. And add to these examples of corruption the fact that in the late Middle Ages, the Vatican was the wealthiest institution in Europe, which caused serious Catholic scholars like Erasmus to point out how far the church had strayed from the poverty and intense spiritual commitment of the days of Jesus and the apostles. A third reason why this control was lost was vernacular Bible translation. Now, vernacular simply means the language of ordinary people. The Bible itself was originally written in Hebrew and Greek, but during the Middle Ages, in fact, the early Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Church used a standard Latin translation of the Bible called the Vulgate. In the 1300s, an English priest and scholar, John Wycliffe, took it upon himself to make the first complete English translation of the Bible from the original Hebrew and Greek. Wycliffe was condemned by the Catholic authorities, and his work was suppressed. But the eagerness of many people to have this English Bible showed a widespread desire across the Christian world for a Bible in the language of people that they could easily understand. Taking his cue from Wycliffe, Jan Hus instigated the translation of the Bible into Czech, and it was made available in 1416, a year after his death. Another important factor in the rise of Protestantism was educational enlightenment. The great universities of Europe were founded beginning around the year 1100. As more and more people were literate and educated, there was a growing skepticism toward the integrity and dogmas of the Roman Catholic clergy. And though the upper ranks of clergy were highly educated, some parish priests were barely literate. And when educated laity were told that they could not understand the Bible or Christian theology but had to learn it from their priests, many of them began to wonder if there were things being kept from them, and if so, why those things were off limits. Add to this that the Middle Ages ended and the Renaissance began around 1400, and educated people in science, art, and philosophy began to openly question certain positions of the church. One thinks of Galileo, for example. So these are some of the factors which made it possible for determined groups to split off from Roman Catholicism and actually survive. They had many differences, of course, but before I finish clip 1, I want to stress the things that these Protestant groups had in common. First, the core Christian beliefs and doctrines were not really in question. The deity of Christ, the humanity of Christ, the Trinity of the Godhead, Jesus' sacrificial death on the cross and his resurrection, the inspiration and authority of the Bible, these and other core doctrines were affirmed by the main Protestant groups as well as by the Catholic Church. Where the Protestants differed from Catholicism, of that time at least, were in 3 distinct areas. First was sola scriptura, that's Latin for Bible only. The Protestants agreed that the Bible is the only source of spiritual authority, not popes, not church councils, not any kind of new revelation. Sola fide means faith only. In other words, Protestants agreed that the Bible teaches that people are saved by faith in Christ alone, not faith plus any kind of religious works or actions, not somehow living a holy life, just faith in Jesus. Then there's the Protestant distinctive of the priesthood of believers. Protestants rejected as unbiblical the idea that only ordained clergy could have personal access to God, and that laity had to use the mediation of priests for their prayers to be heard. They affirm that the Bible teaches that anyone who has faith in Christ can access God through prayer. The function of clergy, then, for Protestants is simply leadership and guidance, not mediation. Okay, so much for clip 1 in video session 15 within the Exploring World Religions series. I hope this overview of the background of Protestantism was helpful. In clip 2, we will move on from the historical background to 2 of the Protestant groups, Lutheranism and Anabaptists. Till then, this is Dr. Michael Bogart. We will see you next time.